Mother's Day has a way of sneaking up on you. But when it does, 1-800-Flowers makes it easy to send mom something beautiful, thoughtful, and worthy of everything she does. Right now, with double blooms from 1-800-Flowers, order 1 dozen roses and get another dozen for free. It's a bigger gesture with fresh, beautiful flowers arranged to make Mother's Day feel as special as she is. Make Mother's Day feel bigger with double blooms at 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/podcast.
Christian giving, Christian receiving. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Do you tithe? Are you a Christian who actually tithes? And when I say tithe, I mean the generally accepted principle of biblical teachings, 10% of income. So do you tithe as a Christian? Not many do. Do you give otherwise? Or are you a modern day American just trying to get stuff, right? Just trying to die with the most money, the biggest houses, the biggest 401k, the biggest trust fund to pass along to your kids. Well, Christians and wealth building have been given a bad name, but if you read your Bible, you know that many in the Bible have been gifted by God with great wealth. And of course, we all know the famous biblical truth, love of money. It's the love of money, not money itself, that is the root of all evil or of many evils. And so I want to get into how much Christians are giving these days to the church, to those in need, and just sort of throw that out there. If you're not giving, but you're trying to build wealth, wouldn't it make sense to give first and sort of put the wealth building in God's hands? Just saying, that's sort of how the tithe is supposed to go without going down that prosperity route where you give and so you sit back and you expect God to give you X amount back. When the Bible talks about the tithe and giving, and God says to test him on this, see if your houses don't overflow with the blessings that he gives. That doesn't mean how prosperity gospel teaches, right? If you give $1, you get back $1. If you give $1, you get back $10. It's not like that. But it does seem to me that being generous opens the door for God to shower you with the blessings that he does promise to give those who are generous of nature in the Bible. With one caveat, that doesn't mean you get your blessings here on earth, right? So before I get into more of this, though, I want to quickly mention that if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, where if you're not subscribing to the Best of Cheryl Chumley, that's my newsletter, I would encourage you to go to the website, WashingtonTimes.com, find the newsletter section, and if you click on it, you'll see all the newsletters that we have available. There are some great ones out there on our website. You should subscribe to them all, really, but you should start with Bold and Blunt. You should start with mine, The Best of Cheryl Chumley, because you won't get just my audio, Bold and Blunt, and my weekly video, Bold and Blunt, delivered right to your email box, but you'll get all the commentaries that I write for the Washington Times right to your email box Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Quite a bargain just for putting in your email address. And you may also get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are available. Vanco, V-A-N-C-O, this organization did this awesome study. If you go through it, it's really, they interviewed 1,000 churchgoers, right? And they asked all kinds of questions about how these churchgoers gave to their church. Basically, they went through 65 church giving and growth stats, and they reported it all. And this is from 2025. So, it's fairly recent. And I mean, I could just read pages of this to you. It's fascinating, but let's just go through some of it. Tithing statistics. And I have just as a quick aside, I have another study from the Barna Barna Group, right, which we all know, that shows some different numbers. So I'll read those as well. But just to start here at Vanco, tithing stats, only 27% of churchgoers tithe at or above the traditional mark of 10% of their income. And that number, Vanco finds, has remained largely the same in recent years. Again, this is from 2025. Young adults between the ages of 24 and 34 are the most likely to give more than 10%. I find that interesting. Older adults, ages 66 to 72, are most likely to give less than 4%. See, if you would ask me, just, for my general opinion, I would have flipped that. I would have said it's the younger ones who give less and the older ones who give more. But nope, not according to this study from Vanco. All right, the average per capita church giving equated to just about 4.35% of household income in 2022. Number 4, digital giving continues to grow. About 50% of all church donations now come through card or online methods. And I have to say, the online giving is it's got to be so beneficial to churches. There is nothing easier for a churchgoer to go online as soon as they get paid, right? To go online, click, 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 and the tithe is paid. Instead of having to wait until Sunday, write out the check or get the cash withdrawal or however it's done, and wait for the plate to be passed. Because it's easy. It's easy in this busy world. First off, not everybody goes to church every Sunday. Things come up, even if you have the best intentions, things come up and you don't end up going. And then you have to sit on that money till the next time you go, right? And sometimes you get paid on a Thursday, or you get paid on a Wednesday, or you get paid on a Friday, and you're supposed to take the first fruits and set it aside for the tithe, right? Set it aside for Sunday. And for some people, they don't have the discipline to do that. So when you have online, it makes it so much easier. And for the churches out there that don't have online giving, get it. You'll probably see people start to donate a lot more than what you're getting right now. All right, let's see. In 2024, recurring gifts accounted for 42% of digital giving and 57% of digital transactions, even though many churches didn't offer the option for this type of giving. See, this just goes, I didn't even read that yet. And I was saying churches need to get an online giving mechanism. If you don't have it, gotta get it. Churches offering, I don't want to read that one, boring. All right, weekly giving is down from 49% in 2015 to 39% in 2025. Come on, guys, it's 10 years' time and it's gone down 10%. Wow. Come on, Christians. Got to get back in the giving game. As of June 2025, 17% of families reduced their annual giving to church, and 50% of church giving comes through cards or banks. There you go again, churches. Get online. Nobody carries cash anymore. Well, one person does that I know. One person, and you know who you are. You're the only person I know who pays for everything in cash, and kudos to you. But most people don't. So if you're a church right now and you're looking to generate additional revenues for your godly endeavors, and you don't have an online giving mechanism, do it. Look, these stats are they're only giving you what you need to go to your affiliated board members and tell them we need to create this on our website. All right, average giving per person in church. Oh, I like this. I'm a Baptist. Okay, I go to a Baptist church. So I did not know this. I'm just reading as I scroll. So this isn't me trying to promote Baptists over other denominations. But here it is, number 14. Baptists report the highest tithe rates of average giving at around 40%, while Methodists sit at about 12%. Restorationist Church of Christ at 17%, and Lutherans at 19%. Number 15, 77% of Protestant churchgoers affirm that tithing is a biblical command that still applies today. Yeah, I think so, right? You know, the Bible hasn't, I haven't gotten an edited version of the Bible from God yet that removes the tithing aspect. Average giving per person, number 16 reads, in 2022 was $2,848, about 4.35% of household income, with the average income being $65,423 that year. Smaller churches, number 17 reads, tend to have higher per person giving. Interesting. Churches with about 50 attendees averaged $2,589 annually per person, while those with 5,000 attendees averaged $2,340. I wonder if it's the more community feel aspect of the smaller churches that drives that higher tithing rate, or if it's more the shaming aspect, right? When you're sitting in a smaller church, you feel like people are watching you, so you feel like you got to put something in the plate each week. I don't know. You know, maybe if you're in a huge church, 5,000 attendees, when the plate comes around, you don't feel as pressured to give because it's more anonymous, right? I don't know what the reason is for that. Interesting though. All right, one more, and then we'll go to Barna. Online only churches, which are much fewer in number, had a significantly lower per person giving at $691 annually. Yeah, because, you know, it doesn't even really feel like church, right? It feels like you're clicking on something that you watch. There's no community, there's no in-person anything. So, plus, nobody is sort of pressuring you into giving. So, all right, let's go to the Barna survey of U.S. Christians in 2021. All right, so this is why the numbers are a little different. What percentage of Christians tithe? 40%. Barna found then. 2 in 5 practicing Christians tithe at least 10% of their annual income. Barna found in 2021. 5% of practicing Christians do not give at all, and 34% say they do not give a set amount. So, what does giving have to do with wealth building in a godly manner, which is basically what my guest is here to talk about? I'll let him talk about it. John Coleman, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It is so great to have you here.
Yeah, Cheryl, thanks so much for having me on.
I can't wait to dive into this topic about money, about the proper way to build wealth in line with biblical principles. You have this book out, Good Money, 6 Steps to Building a Financial Life with Purpose. Why did you decide to write this?
Yeah, I had been working in the financial services industry for a long time. I'm an investor by trade, so I've seen both the opportunities and the challenges with money. And yet on the writing side and the reading side, I really hadn't seen a book try to address comprehensively this idea of human flourishing, living the good life as it relates to money. There were books on money and happiness, books on trying to build an investment portfolio or saving, but many of those didn't address the most fundamental question of what is the role of money in the good life. And I thought that both modern research and the scriptures would have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, the Bible speaks quite a bit to money and building wealth and the proper role of wealth building for a Christian. And I think a lot of Christians get this wrong. I think a lot of Christians think that if you're wealthy, automatically you're not giving enough.
Yeah, that's right. The Bible obviously has quite a lot to say about money. Money is one of the most referenced topics. I believe it's in around 2,350 verses. And many of those verses are cautionary. But importantly, the Bible doesn't say that money in and of itself is a bad thing or that wealth is indicative that you've been living wrongly. If you think about some of the heroes of the Bible, for example, Abraham or David, they were incredibly wealthy people who'd been gifted wealth and position in order to fulfill their obligations as servants of God. And so there is a way in which money can be used for positive purposes. It's earning or saving is not necessarily a bad thing, but the scriptures do warn that it comes with unique temptations. First Timothy famously says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Jesus says that you can't serve two masters. You must neglect one and serve the other. And so money is one of these things that can be a good thing. It can be used for positive purposes. In fact, God, through the parable of the talents and others, actually commands us to try and expand wealth for his purposes. But it also comes with unique temptations that we need to guard against if we're to incorporate money into a flourishing and scripturally consistent life.
And, it's odd to me that when it comes to biblical principles and biblical truths, most Christians go to church and they try and do the right thing. They're on board with prayer, attending services, and all that. But when it comes to money, all of a sudden the blockade goes into place. And the majority of Christians, even church-going Christians, don't tithe. Do you find that odd?
Yeah, I really do. Generosity is one of the clearest concepts in the Bible, both generosity to the church, to the official community of Christians, as well as generosity towards others more generally. Obviously, we all think of the widow and her mite and Jesus speaking about the sacrifices we should make for generosity. And yet, if you look at modern statistics, around 4 in 10 Americans give nothing at all every year. Average percent of GDP given in the United States is around 1.5%. So even those who give tend to give very little. And if you look at the statistics for Christians, they're only slightly better than general population at large. Only around 65% of Christians give anything at all, even tithing, in a given year. And I think in doing so, we're missing out both on a central command of the scriptures to live generously with others, as well as something that's deeply related to human flourishing. If you look at the research on flourishing, for example, generosity is typically one of the 2 or 3 most important things to human flourishing throughout life. It has mental health benefits, physical health benefits, it creates greater community. And so there's this beautiful alignment of what God commands and what can make our lives better that's unlocked through generosity, financial generosity, service to others. And yet so few people are taking advantage of that. And that's why I've written an entire chapter on this idea of giving more and giving well in the Good Money book, so that we can all more deeply engage with that topic.
And I think in America in particular, giving is something that goes hand in hand with the foundations of America's liberties, because the more individuals give, the less we need government to provide.
That's right. I mean, even if you read some of the old works on what made American democracy so special, like Tocqueville's Democracy in America, he highlighted consistently, as did other founding fathers and observers of the early American Republic, that a lot of America rested on this idea of civil society and civil institutions, where communities and individuals would come together to serve the poor, to serve one another, to really engage in community building without the interference of government. And I think as we lose those civil institutions, as we lose this impulse for generosity, as people no longer support one another voluntarily and through charity, the need for government arises, and government almost becomes a replacement of what we could do voluntarily through civil society. And so I think a rebirth or a renaissance of generosity could actually help us to communicate why it's important to limit government and that we should take care of one another voluntarily, which is much more effective, I think, in terms of providing those for those who are in need than government mandated programs.
Yes, and it would probably reel back a lot of the expanding socialism that we see taking place in America. I want to, you said you had a chapter specific to giving in your book, but you talk about 6 steps to building a financial life with purpose. Could you define purpose, what you mean by that, and then also just run down some of those steps? I don't want you to give away everything, but some.
Yeah, absolutely. So I start with this idea of good money mindsets. And purpose here is an intentionality to live a flourishing life. And I think one of the better definitions of human flourishing I've seen is from the Harvard program on human flourishing, which defines it as a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good. So everything in your life that's important is oriented towards purpose and flourishing, things like character and virtue, meaningful work, positive relationships. And so I begin the book. The first step is outlining a framework or two for human flourishing and talking about the mindsets that make money an essential component of that. Things like setting a financial finish line, not confusing your worth and your net worth. And in the remainder of the book, the next 5 steps, try and touch on each area in which our lives intersect with money. So I talk about earning with purpose first. Second, I talk about giving generously and well. Then I talk about consuming wisely, directing our spending towards things that will actually make our lives better rather than worse. I talk about investing with impact, so both tools for investing well, as well as expressing our values through investments. And then I conclude with a chapter on saving for freedom, not retirement. I don't think retirement is good for us. That's reflected in the research. I don't think the scripture ever endorses an American view of retirement. And so I talk about living well and fully throughout your life, but making sure you have the financial freedom to do so. And then outside of that 6-step framework, I conclude with a chapter on money and kids. How do we connect this series of 6 steps to the way in which we mentor and apprentice our children?
You say one of the chapters is keys to purchasing, and this is a paraphrase, keys to purchasing things that make your life better. What are some examples of that?
Yeah, I really try and get people to focus on 4 areas and away from one core area that we get wrong. So, the majority of expenditures that most people have are on things, stuff, right? It's acquisition of clothes or phones or watches or new gadgets, physical things that we think will make our lives better. And of course, we all need some measure of stuff, right? We need clothes on our backs. We need a car to drive. We need a phone to stay in contact. But so often that becomes a really key focus of our spending, even though the research says that after our needs are met, consumption goods really don't add to happiness, and because of the comparison trap with others can often detract from it. And so I instead point people towards 4 areas of spending that I think are linked to the key areas of human flourishing. So that's things like experiences. Experiences tend to not dull over time in the way that things do. I talk about relationships, spending on things that bring us together in community with others. I talk about spending on things that save time, so recover our time so that we can spend those in closer relationship with others, can engage in meaningful work. And then I talk about spending on mental, physical, and spiritual health, so making sure that in body and mind and heart, we're healthy. And if we direct our expenditure towards those things rather than stuff, we tend to create more durable happiness and satisfaction.
In your chapter on investments, I think this is one that probably piques a lot of interest, especially with the chaos in the economy and overseas politics and wars, and how that impacts our own savings and investments. What are your tips there?
Yeah, that chapter I really break into 2 components. The first of those is a simple grounding in the idea of investing early, consistently, and in a disciplined way. I think one of the most important concepts people can learn in their financial lives is this idea of compound earnings. So one example I give at the beginning of the book is, let's say you invested $10,000 for a student graduating high school, for example, this year. In 45 years, as that person approaches retirement age, even though I don't advocate for retirement, that $10,000, if invested at 10%, which is the average return of the S&P, is worth $750,000 at that time. And so there's a real power to investing early and in a disciplined way and being consistent. The second component of that chapter, though, talks about expressing our values through investments. Capital touches almost everything in our lives. And we've seen through the ESG movement and others that many people and institutions are marshaling their capital to influence the world around them, sometimes in bad ways, sometimes in good ways. And so I try and make people aware of that influence so that they know it's happening, and also talk to individuals about how they can think about expressing through their own individual portfolio or the institutions they steward the values that they align with most tightly, so that that money is actually reflective of their most deeply held principles and beliefs. And I think for Christians in particular, that's an important concept, because Christianity talks about aligning our money with something that creates good. And so I wanted to offer a framework to do that.
I think most people are aware of the need to save more, and most people agree probably with all these principles that you put forth in your book. But for a lot of readers, they may feel, well, it's a little late for me to go back in time and start doing A, B, and C. What do you say to them? What do you say to the people listening right now who they're stuck? Their paychecks go right toward bills and they don't feel like they have any money to invest, or they feel like they're enslaved to their debt right now?
Yeah, and that's the most difficult situation to be in, for sure, Cheryl. And I make sure to point out in the book, it is much harder to be poor than to be rich. We talk about all the problems with excess money, which obviously the Bible warns about. But the truth is, it's obviously much more difficult to live hand to mouth, to live paycheck to paycheck. In truth, the book is primarily oriented towards those who have or will have more than they need for their basic necessities. What I would say is there are a set of fundamental practices, and I encourage people to get online for those who are struggling deeply, who are indebted, who are trying to live paycheck to paycheck and put some away, to really think hard about the debt they take on. I talk about good and bad debt in the book for those who are trying to consider it, and what types of debt are probably appropriate and which types are not appropriate, like consumer debt. To try and mitigate the impact of that, to make sure that they're saving a little bit more. One of the concepts I do talk about in the book, in this Save for Freedom, Not Retirement chapter, is the idea that if you get rid of this conventional notion of retirement, kind of saving enough so that you can withdraw from the world and do nothing, the savings goals that you have can be more moderate. The average person now, if they reach retirement age, is often living into their mid to late 80s because of increases in lifespans. And so we actually have a lot of time past that 60 or 65 range when we're living. And if you think instead about totally withdrawing and trying to live off savings, and instead about working part-time or working a job that's more fulfilling in your retirement years, or thinking about things that can give greater impact, that actually can reduce the amount you need to save in order to create that freedom and flexibility in your older years, because you still have some income stream forthcoming, even though it might not be as much as in the core job you've worked over time. And so I do encourage people to look at some of the basic principles around debt, around savings, around restructuring their debt, et cetera, if they're trapped in that, but also to begin to think about their life comprehensively so that they can plan their life to save for freedom and autonomy so that they can work the way that they want to, rather than just simply withdrawing from the world and retiring.
And I just want to finish with this last point about the power of the tithe again, John, because I truly believe that biblically, truthfully speaking, that if you tithe, you're putting God in charge of your finances right there. That's sort of the foundation. And I wonder your thoughts on that, but also, do you have any personal examples, either through yourself or those you've come across in life, about an inspirational, motivational, truthful story about how the tithe has worked?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think tithing and this concept of generosity towards God is obviously central to the Bible. Really, I think a Christian conception of money is that all of our resources are God's. They're kind of on loan to us to steward while we're here, which is something the parable of the talents makes clear. And so, in a way, our tithe is simply an acknowledgement of that. We're not giving something to God, we're simply giving back to Him something that He's given to us, that He's entrusted to us for the period of time where we're here. And so I think Christians need to create this disassociation with money, where we don't hoard it, we don't think of it as something that's our property that we have to let go of for God, but rather that these are God's resources and that He calls us to be generous with those while we're here. And you hear story after story of people who tithe, and the Bible talks about the idea that if you give generously to God, that He'll reward you for that. One thing I'd be careful about is I don't believe in a kind of prosperity gospel component of that, which is, hey, if you tithe or you give money to God, He'll necessarily create financial prosperity in your lives, you may
Right.
do so. And you meet many business owners who credit their generosity with the growth of their business, etc. But I think at the very least, it reorients your heart so that you can experience greater flourishing. And one simple example I'd give is my family hosted our first family giving meeting this last Christmas. And we asked all the kids to give a component of what they've saved over the year to charity. And as we asked them what percentage they wanted to give, we suggested they give at least 10%, but they could give more. Our very first kid that we came to, my oldest son, said he wanted to give 100% of what he had to charity, to those charities supporting his sister's medical condition, actually, which was really deeply impactful. And then 3 of the other 4 kids said, I want to give 100%. And we didn't let them do so, Cheryl, because we wanted to teach them some other lessons. We kind of capped it at about 30%. But that outflowing of generosity really pulled us together as a family. I think it really created deeper relationships for us. It inspired my wife and I to be more generous. And there may come material rewards for that for us and for the kids. But even if those don't come, it created a reward in terms of our family, in terms of the happiness we have, in terms of the values that we embrace together, that I think is worth more than any material reward that could come.
Which goes toward what you said, just to clarify about the prosperity gospel teaching, the blessings that God grants for the tithe. It doesn't necessarily have to be financial. It's not like a dollar for a dollar, right?
That's right. Yeah, and he could bless you financially, and
Right.
people have experienced that. But I hesitate to embrace somebody who says it is dollar for dollar, and that it's really, and because it's not intended to be a financial transaction with God. It's intended to be an openness of heart with Him, and then an experience of His grace, however He chooses to reward that.
Absolutely. John Coleman, Good Money, 6 Steps to Building a Financial Life with Purpose. Thanks for writing this, and thanks for coming on Bold and Blunt to talk about it.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. Take care. It's great to speak.
God bless. And that's another Bold and Blunt. Remember, if you like Bold and Blunt, you make it Bold and Blunt at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. In the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.